Jonah's a story. And actually, as we begin to read it, I think you'll see it's a especially readable story. The way it is written is very approachable and makes you want to read it fast. And I'm actually going to pull back against that and try to get us to read it a little slower than we might normally. But I'm going to open it up in the New Revised Standard Version, which is, if you recall with Nahum, which is really a challenging read, I opened in the New Living Translation, which is a more paraphrased translation. NRSV is a challenging translation. It's they put a lot more focus on how to translate the Greek and Hebrew literally, and less on how to make it readable in English. But it's still going to be very, very readable in English. I'll show you. I like Oremus. It's not a...
No, but that's okay. They can.
All I've got on the screen right now is just Jonah 1 in the NRSV. So if you've got a Bible, you can see what's on the screen. And let's read. And I'm gonna stop us once in a while. I also want to invite any of you to say, "Stop! I've got a comment. I've got a question. I want to talk about what we're reading." But let's begin just with the word of the Lord from the book of Jonah, chapter 1, verse 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, "Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." That great city is going to be important later. Just remember that phrase. Nineveh, the great city. But Jonah set out to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid his fare and went on board to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. Do you feel the almost disbelief on the part of the storyteller here? God sent Jonah to Nineveh, and he went to Tarshish. I said to Tarshish. It repeats it 3 times. It's the opposite direction. It's actually twice as far in the opposite direction. So already there are numerous aspects of this that, we gloss over in Sunday school, but that early readers of this text would say, "You're kidding. This is shocking." First of all, God is sending a prophet where of all places? Nineveh? Nineveh, the capital of Assyria? Assyria, that horrible empire who conquered us and killed us and dragged us into slavery? Isaiah talks about, "And ye shall be dragged off with hooks, the last of you with fish hooks." Which is historical. I mean, we've got wood cuttings from Assyria dragging off slaves, not with handcuffs, but by piercing them with hooks. It's a brutal empire. On one hand, there's the, wow, God is sending someone to Nineveh. But then on the other hand, there is, and when God tried to send someone, when God chose the prophet Jonah, Jonah ran in the other direction. And this has never happened before. This is what you often get. You will regularly, throughout the text of the Bible, get God choosing someone and them being afraid or reluctant, right? Can you think of any examples of that? Of God saying, "I want you to go, speak to the people," and the person God says that to says, "I can't." Moses. Brilliant example. Yeah. Dave. Moses says, "Listen, I have a stutter. God says, we can accommodate for that, right? I'm going to have Aaron, I have a stutter is maybe too much of an interpretation, but he says, I am not eloquent of speech and tongue, and sometimes it's assumed that that means he stutters. So God says, oh, well, Aaron will help you. You'll have backup. And so Moses says, okay. How about, have any of y'all heard of Gideon? Right? Gideon's another one of those. God says, hey, I want you to go judge the people. And he says, all right, I just want to be sure that you're really God. So can you make this fleece wet and the ground around it dry? And God's like, yeah, no problem. And he's like, okay, that could have been a fluke. So can you make the ground wet and the fleece dry? And God's like, yeah, now go. But Gideon goes. I mean, he hesitates, but he goes. Another really famous one is Jeremiah. Jeremiah has a lot of fear and trepidation. He says, in fact, God says to Jeremiah, hey, I want you to go preach my word to the people. They're going to reject and despise you. And Jeremiah's like, do I have to? And God's like, yeah. So Jeremiah says, well, okay then. Jonah, here's the word, is called by God, is chosen by God. He's the one that God picked, that God thinks is best to do this. And he says, I'm going to Tarshish. Now, we need to do some interpretive work. Because we need to ask the question, why? Why does Jonah flee? What's his motivation? And this is not, it doesn't say in the text, so we're speculating here. But yeah, go ahead, Joe.
He hated the people from Nineveh so bad, he couldn't imagine going and preaching to them. And God had indicated, I think, that it was possible that some of them could be saved. He didn't want any of them to be saved.
I mean, I think that's certainly, yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a good, place to go. I think when this book was being read early on, which it would have been read during the Babylonian exile, so Jonah had his experience. It got written down. Maybe it got written down in the third person by Jonah. Maybe it got written by somebody else. I'm not sure. The text doesn't really say, but it's called Jonah. All the other prophets are called by the people who wrote them, so we assume. But by the time it's read, yeah, Assyria's conquered Israel. And so, yeah, we hate them. We know who they are, and we dislike them. And it's normal, whenever we as readers read a text, any text, not just a biblical text, we project our own feelings onto the people in the text. That's just a normal thing to do, and it's a thing God knew we were going to do when he wrote it. So that's a part of it. Yeah, I think there's real reason to think, Jonah kind of, we assume, knew who these people were.
Maybe that's why he chose him to go.
Maybe, and that's an interesting idea to hold in your mind. I think one question we should keep in our heads as we continue to read is, could God have picked someone better? How would the story have gone if God had sent someone obedient to Nineveh? What if God had sent, Hosea? It's a different moment in history, but someone like that who was ready to do whatever God said, no matter what. How would that have gone? It's an interesting question. A couple other, so set out to flee, I think is important. The fact that he's fleeing, he's running from, in some sense, the Assyrians, and I think, if the Assyrians are brutal warriors, it's reasonable to have a certain amount of fear. It's also important, as we read this first chapter, that he's fleeing from the presence of the Lord. And that's something that is not necessarily a part of our modern context and understanding. And the reason it's not a part of our modern context and understanding is because it's wrong. You can't flee from the presence of the Lord. God is everywhere. It was very, very common in the ancient world to think that you could. To think that, this country has its God, and this country has its God, and that country has their God, and the different gods have different dominions, they have different levels of power, and the more people there are nearby that kind of worship that God, the more powerful that God is there. So if my God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel, is sending me somewhere I don't want to go, I need to go somewhere where they worship a different God so that my God won't have any power over me. This is also, we see this in Genesis, where Jacob travels to a faraway land and he sees a ladder to heaven. I just want to say a stairway to heaven. That's Led Zeppelin. He sees a ladder, and he says, "Wow, surely the Lord was in this place and I was not aware of it." Jacob thought that God only existed locally, that God was a God for his little nation. And he didn't realize that no matter how far you go away, God's still in charge. God's still in control. And that's a part of why, it's connected to the central theme of this book in multiple ways. One, that's why God cares about Nineveh, right? Because you would think the God of Israel doesn't need to care about Nineveh. The God of Assyria is going to take care of Nineveh. No, I'm God. I'm the God of everywhere. Which again, it bears mentioning because we all know that. Of course God's the God of everywhere. But Jonah doesn't. Jonah, at least in some part of his brain, at least in his subconscious, thinks he can get away from God. What an interesting mistake for a prophet to make. What an interesting theological error for God's chosen mouthpiece to commit. Now, we can ask interpretive questions about kind of what part of Jonah's brain is making this error, right? Whether Jonah really knows God's everywhere, but he's scared and he's hateful and he doesn't want to believe God's everywhere right now, so he kind of pushes that idea down. Sometimes modern spiritual leaders do that, right? They know that adultery is wrong, but they think that they're special and they're going to get away with it. Or maybe he just isn't that good a prophet. I mean, I think we have to ask that question. We don't have to give that answer. We don't have to say, yes, for sure, Jonah is not that good a prophet. But at least based on this first paragraph, I think that's a question that this paragraph wants to put in our heads. What's wrong with this prophet? This prophet is so different from the other prophets I know about. This is not like Ezekiel at all. This is not like Elijah at all. And we get a repetition of the presence of the Lord. So the text is telling you it matters. The text is telling you, pay attention. He's trying to get away from God. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a mighty storm came upon the sea that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried to his God, lowercase g. They threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. Jonah, meanwhile, had gone down into the hold of the ship and had laid down and was fast asleep. What kind of a prophet is this? The captain came and said to him, what are you doing? Sound asleep? Get up. Call on your God. Perhaps your God will spare us a thought so that we don't perish. You've got a non-Jewish, pagan ship captain telling the prophet of the Lord, pray. Can you pray, please? And any other comments? Any other thoughts, feelings, questions, arguments? I had a debate class in college. Somebody always said, at the end of class, the teacher was like, any other arguments, rude remarks, any debates? No? Go ahead, David.
I guess he's not a real true believer in God, I guess.
I mean, he is certainly, if his faith in God is in there, it's being buried deep. Yeah. Go ahead.
But then you were saying, why did God pick Jonah?
Yeah.
Well, but in the Bible, God has, it's his MO, it's his history. He always picks the most unlikeliest people to do some of the most important jobs, But he also says that he won't ask you to do anything that he wouldn't give you the help or the knowledge to succeed.
Yeah, preach. That's great, yeah. Yeah, God's calling is God's enabling. I often like to say that thinking you're unqualified for a leadership position or a volunteer position is one of the qualifications. If I'm looking for someone at the church to do an important job, say to lead a Bible study of their peers, and they say, oh yeah, I know lots about the Bible, I can handle that, I start to think, maybe you actually can't handle it, right? But if they say, well, I don't really know if I can do that, but, I'll study and I'll try, that's a qualification, right? You need that. You need that humility in order to be a good choice. So if you don't think you can do it, that's a good sign. Perhaps God will spare us a thought, or perhaps the God will spare us a thought so that we do not perish. I'm in verse 7 now. The sailors, it looks like we've got a little translation note, and it's not showing me what it is, but probably mariners or something, some other variant of that word. The sailors said to one another, or maybe just they, and the translator decided to make it clearer. They said to one another, come, let us cast lots so that we may know on whose account this calamity has come upon us. So this is another kind of piece of the ancient world that maybe is not as relatable. These are multiple people, sailors from different countries, worship different gods, and they come together in this belief that when we cast lots, when we roll dice, when we do something that is subject to chance, the gods are able to influence that more directly than they're able to influence other things. And so, again, we see in other parts of the Old Testament, like in the books of the Kings, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, we have the breastplate with Urim and Thummim, these two little rocks, and you would kind of shake the breastplate and move the rocks around, and that was a way to determine the will of God, because it was understandable to the people at that time that a good way to hear from God was by casting lots. So God kind of enabled the people to cast lots, to know God's will. But this was true all around the area, that kind of, hey, when we roll dice, it's God that picks. And so if we want to know the will of God, we're going to cast lots. And so we've got a question. We know there's a storm. We suspect, reasonably superstitiously, but it happens that they're right this time, we suspect that the storm is because some god is mad at someone on this boat. You always kind of, that's a pretty common pagan belief all across the world, Oh, why are the crops not growing? Perhaps we need to sacrifice a virgin. Why are we at a storm? Perhaps someone sinned. Someone made some god mad. Let's cast lots to figure it out. They cast the lots, and the lot falls on Jonah. So again, just like with the Urim and Thummim, God does actually work through this lot casting system in this case. That's not to say that that's a good thing to do, or that God always works through casting lots, but at this moment, in this time and place, God makes sure that, you want to know who's the cause of it? It's Jonah. Then they said to him, tell us why this calamity has come upon us, now that we know it's your fault. Will you share? Do tell. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What's your country? And of what people are you? These are great questions. Don't you love those questions? Yes, I'm trying to get my church to evangelize more, and part of the opportunity to evangelize is provoking questions. You know, you want somebody to ask you, be like, well, what do you believe? How do you understand the Bible? It's great. Of what people are you? I am Hebrew. He replied, I worship the Lord. All capital letters, the Lord, means Yahweh. It means the four-letter first name of God. I worship God. But we don't like writing that, so in Hebrew documents we often say Adonai, the Lord. But the English text is giving us a hint that he's using God's first name here. I worship, and even Yahweh, Yahweh's a guess. It's not like the final correct pronunciation. That's just an English way we translate. Or Jehovah, same thing. It's a translation of the same four letters. Yod, He, Vav, He. I worship Yahweh, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Heaven means the sky. Heaven means it's not just the afterlife. It also implies, the atmosphere. And so he confesses here, my God made the whole world. We believe in my country that God made the sea and the dry land. We believe that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. So he knows that God's got some kind of dominion over the whole earth, but he thought that he could get away. He thought, maybe God backed off from Tarshish a couple of centuries ago, and I can get away from him if I go over there. But he knows, he's got this theology, and he's not, apparently, Jonah, surprised that God's still got some control over the wind and the waves on this boat. Any more thoughts, comments, feelings, sermons? All right. Then the men were even more afraid and said to him, what is this that you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord. Why? Because he told them so.
He already told them.
How often in the Bible do you get these kind of, it's almost like snarky, it's almost a joke the way they told them so. Then they said to him, what shall we do to you, that the sea may quieten down for us? For the sea was growing more and more tempestuous. That's a very NRSV word, right? The NLT is not going to use the word tempestuous. It's going to say, rough. He said to them, pick me up and throw me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great storm has come upon you. I want you to keep in mind here, Jonah does not know the story of Jonah and the whale. When Jonah asks to be thrown into the sea, he's asking to be killed. He says, go ahead, let me die, get me off this boat, save your lives. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to bring the ship back to land. They know it's his fault. They know he's running from the Lord. They know that they're suffering because of him. But these non-Jewish, non-Christian worship other gods sailors say, we don't want to kill someone. They try as hard as they can to get the ship to land. But they could not. For the sea grew more and more stormy against them. There's an NLT word for tempestuous, stormy. Yeah, that would have worked. I'm sure it's two different Hebrew words, and, Then they cried out to the Lord. Please, O Lord, we pray. This is the pagans saying this. This is the sailors. Please, Yahweh, we pray, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not make us guilty of innocent blood. Don't make us kill him, and don't sink our ship, please. O Lord, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea. And the sea ceased from its raging. Does that make sense to you? So these sailors pray, first time in their lives, to this strange God of a strange land, the land of Israel, and they say, all right, God of Israel, please don't sink our ship, and please don't hold us accountable for killing this innocent guy. You're in charge here. So if you have decided to put this storm in this place and put this man on this boat, and we throw him off, that's your doing, not ours. It's kind of reminiscent of Pontius Pilate, right? I wash my hands of it. I'm just the governor here. I'm just following orders. It's the crowd that's telling me I've got to kill this man. The book of Jonah often brings up comparisons to World War II and the Nazis. When we talk about Assyria, we talk about the evil empire, the most familiar evil empire that most Americans are aware of and can relate to is the Nazis. And so when we start seeing people say, we're going to follow orders, we know that was a big, big defense after World War II for Nazis to say, I didn't want to do any genocide. I just did what I was told to do. I just trusted that the experts knew. Anyway, but overall, I think it's worth noting, these are pretty on balance. These are not racial negative stereotypes of foreign nations. Sometimes in the Bible we go into Egypt, and Egypt's just terrible. But these guys, they're pretty decent folk overall. Maybe because we've got this prophet who's not such decent folk. And so there's a contrast going on here. This next part. Are you ready? Are you sitting down?
Yeah, we know what's happening now.
You've read this before, I get it, but it helps to read slowly. So they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea. The sea ceased its raging. Then the men feared the Lord even more. And they offered a sacrifice to Yahweh. And they made vows. But the Lord provided a large fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. I think I'm going to stop reading here. We'll open up chapter 2 next week, and we'll just discuss now. But verse 16, I think, the whole thing is worthy of discussion. We'll see where the discussion takes us. I think verse 16 is fascinating.
Because he witnessed to them.
He witnessed to them. And the reason he witnessed to them is because he did what right?
He finally confessed and he said, it's me, I'm running away.
Yeah. So he admitted what he did wrong. At the insistence of these godless heathens. Jonah's disobedience worked for the conversion of these sailors. The fact that Jonah did the wrong thing made the right thing happen.
Yeah, the Lord knew that ahead.
Yeah! And of course, as you say, you've read this story before. So what happens on a small scale on the boat is going to happen again on a large scale. Which I think speaks to that question of, did God choose the wrong guy? Right? Couldn't he have chosen someone obedient? Well, if he did, then nobody would have been on the boat with these sailors going the wrong direction. Right? And if someone was on the boat with these sailors going the wrong direction, say God said, hey, go take a ride to Tarshish for no particular reason, they wouldn't have been begging him to know. Tell us about your God, please. Yeah, go ahead.
We said earlier that these sailors were non-believers, right?
Yeah.
So here they're praying. To which God are they praying to?
They're praying to the Lord. They're praying to Yahweh. Yeah, they're praying to Jonah's God.
Okay.
They're praying to the God that they have only heard of through Jonah. So yeah, it says back in 5, each cried to his God. So they have these other gods. They have, and we don't know what the mixture is, or if they're all worshiping some particular other god. But they're crying to somebody else. That's not working. They wake up Jonah. They say, "You pray to your God. Maybe your God will answer." Jonah's God answers. The answer is, you're going to have to throw Jonah into the sea. They say, okay, that works. And then they decide, we're going to offer sacrifices, and we're going to make vows to this God. The God who made heaven and earth, the sea and the dry land. Go ahead.
And if Jonah hadn't been sleeping and they were all praying to all these gods, they wouldn't have known which God made it stop right.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, they were all praying at the same time. So it's like everything he did wrong, what you intended for evil, God intended for good, right? It's almost as if every last thing that Jonah did wrong, that was a violation of the expectations, the moral code, what you ought to do as a prophet, turned out to work in favor of these men.
And they didn't want to die because of Jonah's sin.
Yes. Yeah.
So they were like,
Like, don't blame us.
don't
We didn't
blame
do it.
us. Right,
Yeah.
right.
And of course we do get, before chapter 2, now I should mention, the chapter differences, the places where we draw the lines dividing the chapters, that showed up in the Middle Ages. That was not a part of the Hebrew text. But we do get this kind of word of assurance. It's not just that God was brutal to Jonah and decided to make these sailors shed innocent blood. Jonah survived. Jonah...
Yeah, he had a plan.
God had a plan. Yeah.
And the Spirit of the Lord didn't really come upon Jonah until he was belched out of the belly of the fish.
That is a great... Yeah, and we should probably talk about it more after we get the vomiting, I think it's cash is the word, yeah, but after the whale spits him up on the shore, what we say is the word of the Lord came to Jonah. In the Judges especially, there is a very important phrase that says, and the Spirit of the Lord was upon blank. The Spirit of the Lord was upon Samson. Samson's kind of your prototypical judge because he's a superhero, right? He gets the super strength.
But Moses,
yeah.
all the good stuff happened when the Spirit of the Lord was upon Moses.
Yeah. So there's this concept of, when you're kind of in the groove with God, when God's working with you and you've got power, you've got. For where we start is the word of the Lord came to Jonah. God spoke to Jonah. He didn't empower Jonah just yet. He spoke to Jonah. He said, all right, you just go to Nineveh. Presumably, and then the Spirit of the Lord, I'll be with you, but you go. We'll see that important phrase, Spirit of the Lord, coming up soon. Other thoughts, feelings?
Go
Go. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm confused. How does God say that you're a prophet? How do you pick him to be a prophet and then do all this?
It kind of doesn't say, right? I mean, often when we read the Bible, we're limited to what's in the text. And so, I mean, we know God knows everything. We know that God has a sovereign choice, has the ability to call shots and
in a master plan,
and make those shots realized. But it doesn't say why God picked Jonah. We have to ask that question. Why did God pick Jonah? And did God make the wrong choice? Did God, when he realized what Jonah was doing, say, well, I got to go to plan B, but this is not ideal? But I think the fact that because of Jonah's disobedience, we get witness, we get conversion, we get life change, is interesting. And it speaks a lot to a question that I think we're going to bump up again reasonably frequently as we continue to read the Bible, and especially the minor prophets. Because Habakkuk kind of had that going on too, didn't he? Habakkuk has faith. He's faithful. He's a lot more obedient than Jonah, right? He preaches the word, but he has concerns, questions, doubts. And he thinks he knows better than God at a few moments. Now, Habakkuk enters into conversation with God, which is a much better thing to do than trying to run away from the presence of the Lord.
Which you cannot do.
But these prophets aren't saints. They're not these magical people that do everything right all the time. These prophets have thoughts and feelings and opinions, and disagreements with God, and they make mistakes.
they're men.
And hopefully they don't make mistakes
Mortal men.
in their prophecy. And in fact, there are some moments. There's a really funny bit in the book of Numbers, which, by the way, Numbers is another one of those books, just gets a bad rap. People talk about Numbers like it's this terrible, boring book. Numbers has some really great, funny stuff in it. And there's one place where the king of Israel hires a false prophet, prophet from another land, who will take a bribe, hires him, and says, all right, I want you to, preach against our enemies and preach in favor of us. And the prophet can't do it. He keeps saying, blessings on the enemies and curses on the disobedient people because it's speaking the word of the Lord, and he can't control what the word of the Lord is. Or similarly, there's a moment in Samuel where King Saul goes to a witch to bring Samuel back from the dead. And Samuel shows up back from the dead and starts yelling at Saul for doing witchcraft. And it just, anyway. It's always something. But the point is, we are playing with, and it's a fear and trembling thing. What happens when the people God calls aren't perfect, and the people that God calls make mistakes, and the people that God calls are human? And that can be uncomfortable, and it can be challenging, because it's challenging to this idea, that these are the people who wrote the Bible. These are the people from whom we learn what God is like. It would be much more convenient if they were inerrant, if there were no possibilities of bad motives or limited historical context and views in their heads or anything like that. But what we get instead, and I think the book of Jonah makes a good case that it's actually better this way. because now we can relate with them.
Yeah.
Now these people who are crying out to God, who are speaking the word of the Lord, who are telling us what God is like, are having their own experiences and their own struggles and their own doubts. And as a result, they go on adventures. You know, Jonah, it reads like an adventure story. There are these, you know, descriptions of the waves crashing and the boat's about to sink, and it's, you know, it's enthralling, and it's written to be enthralling. They didn't have to say that. It could have been a speech. It could have just been, this is why you shouldn't run from the Lord. They don't get that. We get, and Jonah sets out. You know.
Where were they going?
They were going to Tarshish, which...
the whole ship?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, and they said they had cargo, so presumably a lot of them were merchants. And it would have been reasonably common for, you know, you didn't have like, you know, passenger ships. You didn't have like ferries in those days. What you'd do is you'd find a group of merchants or fishermen and you'd pay for passage aboard. And sometimes you're paying, you know, paying with your labor in addition to your fare, and sometimes you pay a little more and they say, yeah, we've got an extra spot down in the hull. You stay there the whole time, don't get in our way, we'll give you passage.
My footnote says that Tarshish is probably in southern Spain, so that is about as far as...
As he can imagine going,
Yeah.
right? Going to the ends of the earth. Yeah. Surely, if I go to southern Spain, God won't be there. Surely. Any other thoughts, feelings, comments?
Well, I kind of look at Jonah as being a foreign missionary.
Yeah.
It's a foreign missionary.
Well, that's what the Lord wanted, but he didn't want to do it at first.
Yeah. I kind of want to leave that. Any other comments on that before I don't want to, I've been talking too much already this hour. What do y'all think of Jonah as foreign missionary?
Well, most of them want to go, I think.
Most missionaries want to go.
I think so.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't.
Yeah.
They feel a calling, so they feel they have to go.
Yeah. Kind of reading into it.
Yeah.
This person going to a foreign land, killing and trying to follow where God wants him to be. I just view that as a foreign place for him to go.
David, did you have another comment?
That city that he's supposed to go to, how it just says the wickedness of the city. He doesn't say how bad it is or anything. You know, that's the only time it comes up.
That's true. All the text says is it's a great city and their wickedness has come before me. So we do get a reference to wickedness, but that's it. Yeah.
But it came before the Lord.
The wickedness has come before the Lord.
The Lord, not Jonah.
Yeah.
Therefore, if it, you know, if you think about it, the notice of the Lord, it must have been off.
Yeah. Well, and also that gives you some more explanation for why Jonah thinks he needs to go as far as Tarshish, right? Because God's aware of the wickedness in Assyria. So I gotta go farther than that.
Well, he can't find me.
I gotta get on the bullet train. I gotta get on a boat. Boats can go a lot faster than horses or camels, right? Going back to the foreign missionary thing, I relate with Jonah a lot. When I was young, I know you all think I'm like still potty training, but you know, when I was in high school, college, I remember feeling a pretty significant amount of pressure to feel like, man, I gotta finish this. I gotta graduate so that I can go do some work that matters. I want to go, and I'm ready to go anyway, God. Like, Ryan in college says, Timbuktu sounds cool. Mali and Empire, Mansa Musa, that's, fine with that. Fiji, where is the distant, unwashed tribe, exotic adventure, Indiana Jones, that sounds great to me. And I finished college, and I had already, I was aware that God had kind of tapped me. I was aware that I was called of God to vocational ministry. I didn't know where, didn't know how, didn't know what that looked like. Felt like more of a missionary than a pastor. And then God called me and said, go to Kansas State University. The middle, I don't know, somebody here had a farm in Kansas, didn't they? There was somebody in the room that had a Kansas connection.
I was real close.
You were real close. Not far from where I ended up in Kansas was the geographic center of the contiguous 50 states. So if you were to cut out a map of the United States, discount Alaska and Hawaii, and balance it on a pencil, you'd be balancing it, about 20 miles from where God was calling me. It was about the least exotic, least exciting place I could possibly imagine being sent.
You was just probably a cornfield or something.
Yeah, we had wheat field, more, yeah. I had in my mind, I like non-Christians. I like, working with the heathens and talking about, these novel concepts of grace and love and Christians. I mean, Christians are so boring. They
I know how those.
God says, go to Kansas. Yeah. And I went, and it turned out great. I spent 3 years in Kansas. I met my wife there. We eventually moved down to Texas to go to seminary for another kind of, put up or shut up moment in my life where I was trying to start communities and trying to figure out what the church of the next generation looks like, and realized that I needed, some more education to do that. But I do think that that the shape of the call, I mean, in a lot of ways, Jonah is the opposite of the archetypal missionary, right? In a lot of ways, Jonah is the goofus, not the gallant, the bad example. But yet, this bad example kind of is what it always feels like. It kind of is when God calls you, and I do believe that it happens at every level of call. It happens whether God is calling you to talk to the person behind you at the line at the supermarket, to have a friendly conversation and see if it might lead to spiritual things, or if God calls you to leave your home, sell all your possessions, and move to Fiji. In the greater as well as in the lesser, there is always in us a certain amount of defiance, rebellion, fear, sin, disagreement, priorities that are different from God's priorities. And we have to figure out how to work through those things. Because, this is also relatable, because no is not an option. Because when God calls you, you're gonna go. Not just you're supposed to go, but God will make a way. God will make it happen. God always gets his man.
must have felt pretty brave when he said, I caused all this, throw me in the sea.
Yeah, maybe.
You know?
Pick me up and throw me into the sea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Presumably the sailors, wanted to know, all right, does your God like an albatross? Can we sacrifice an albatross? If we do a particular dance, is there a way to, and he says, you're going to have to kill me.
Judy says, good thing it was a whale, not a shark.
I should mention, just because there has been certain debate about this, and I don't want to go on record saying the wrong thing, it never actually says whale in the Bible. It says large fish, which is how we would describe a whale. Whales are large sea creatures. The Bible describes bats as birds because they fly. They didn't have, taxonomy, genus, and species in those days, so it's just, something that swims in the sea that's big.
Great fish.
Yeah. And some people assume that means it was a purpose-built animal, right? Not necessarily a sperm whale or a humpback whale, but a particular fish that could swallow a man and keep him alive.
This was a special fish.
Could be. It doesn't say specifically, but it says large fish. And then there are, and then Jesus mentions it in Greek.
Yeah,
the Greek and Hebrew translations get funky. But
I
think it's fine to refer to it colloquially as Jonah and the whale. I think if at your church in the second grade classroom you've got a whale depicted with a blowhole and Jonah, I'm not going to come there and burn it down because it's heretical. I think it's fine. But we should just know, we're filling in the blanks here. We're making certain assumptions.
It says here, this is a King James Study Bible. So it talks about Jesus said that it was a sea monster.
A sea monster.
Oh.
That's interesting. I wonder. In Matthew. Let's go ahead and pull that up. What's the verse in Matthew?
Yeah. It's supposed to be Matthew is chapter 12, verse 40.
In creation, doesn't it talk about the Leviathans?
Yes, it talks about the sea monsters in creation, and it talks, the word Leviathan I'm familiar with in Job. It talks about, can you pull out a Leviathan with a hook? But there are kind of references to sea monsters. Now, again, a sea monster, both in the Bible and in the great age of sail, right, the 1700s, may well have been a normal earthly existent animal, right? If you are a conquistador sailing to the New World and you encounter a blue whale that is 10 times the size of your ship, and you don't get a great look at it, and you go back to Spain and tell about it, you're going to say, we saw a sea monster. Right? And even more so, 1,500 years before that. I have Matthew 12:40. For Jonah was 3 days, 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, and so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And let me see how they reference huge fish in Greek. Ketuus. I'm not familiar with that. But it is not ichthus, which is the word for fish. Strong's Greek. One occurrence. Okay, so it's a Harpex legomena. Sea monster, huge sea fish, whale. So it's its own special word, which, ironically enough, the word that biblical scholars use to refer to special words is Harpex legomena, which is its own ridiculous sounding. Sounds like magic words, doesn't it? Like something from Harry Potter. Harpex legomena.
Say it again.
Harpex legomena?
Yeah.
You don't need to know. It's not something that you.
let's go with
But
bibbidi bobbidi.
But the point for David's question is, so this word ketos, it's only a word that's used in this particular part of Matthew. It's a special word that Jesus, so, which we get the same thing in English. Sometimes people will say tempestuous, and it's not a word that you use very often. And it's the same idea. But when a word is used over and over again, we get a good sense of its meaning. Like faith or Lord. And when a word is only used once, we kind of only have the context of that one verse to help us understand. It's what Jonah was in the belly of.
Yeah.
A ketos. All right, well, it is 11. I should let you go. Does somebody want to just bless us, close us in prayer?
I wanted to make an announcement.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're having potluck this Sunday at church, and I wanted to invite everybody to come. You don't have to bring a dish. If you want to, you can. The theme is memory lane. Potluck will be at 11:30. If you want to come to service, it's the hour before at 10:30.
We always have a whole lot of food. Did you?
There you go.
Sorry? Yeah, let me just say a brief prayer. Lord God, thank you for all the people that gathered. And I pray, as you prayed for your disciples, that you would bring all things to our remembrance throughout the week, that we'd remember the things we learned. In your name we pray. Amen.
We used to do that at our church because he went to Taylor and